Stop before you click away. Today I have something very special. I've gathered the best and most terrifying story about serial killers and those obsessed with killing I've read on Reddit. Story that left me in utter disbelief. So I need to warn you. What you're about to hear is not a game. It's not fiction. This actually happened in real life. I spent hours searching for the best horror story on Reddit, and I finally found the best, truly terrifying, true story. So watch the video till the end. Until now, if you get scared easily, leave. This is your only warning. But if you're brave enough to stay, it will be one of the scariest stories you will ever hear in your life. Before we start, subscribe to Mikey HR and hit the like button. If you haven't watched these two videos, you've missed out on a lot. You can watch it on the channel after this video. I spend hours finding these stories so you don't have to. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything. Now, turn off the lights. And let's begin. The story is from r/nosleep from the narrator Carl. By title, People Think I'm a Serial. It's far worse than that. I won't tell you my name. If you watch the news regularly, you probably already know it. I'm rather famous right now. Or perhaps, more appropriately, infamous. The media has been covering my story for months, and I've been in all the major newspapers. My name is a source of heated debate. People discuss me in the office break room and at bars and restaurants. Housewives scare each other with stories of me when they get together for lunch, embellishing my crimes, consult in their imaginations to conjure up the most lurid details they can come up with to get a rise out of their friends. I've been featured on all the big real-life crime shows, and various esteemed professionals in the psychiatric field and criminal profilers have sat down with talk show hosts and major network news pundits to offer their own insights and theories into what makes me tick, what caused me to become what I am. I won't keep you in suspense. I'll just come out and say it. I'm what most people would call a serial killer. I was apprehended 10 months ago after committing 40 murders in 10 states over an 8-year period, and am currently locked up in a federal prison. My murder trial is in progress, and the odds are not in my favor. There's a ton of evidence against me. Chances are good that I'll be convicted and probably sentenced to death. People are already comparing me to the likes of Bundy, Gacy, Gein, and Dahmer. I have to be escorted into the courthouse with armed guards and wearing a bulletproof vest because of death threats made against me by the grieving relatives of my victims. The outside of the courthouse is a circus whenever we arrive. Various journalists, spectators, curiosity seekers, freaks, you name it, are crowded around the front of the building in the hundreds. My trial is being televised, and my lawyers told me it's the media event of the decade. Like I'm supposed to be proud of that. I couldn't care less. Yes, I did commit those murders, all 40 of them. I won't deny it. No, I'm not a sociopath or a psychotic. I didn't hear voices telling me to do it. I didn't do it because God told me to do it in a dream to cleanse the world of sin. I didn't do it because I was trying to impress a celebrity or my dog told me to. I didn't do it for political reasons or to try to incite a race war like Manson did either. I did it because I had to. Someone had to do it. I killed 40 people, but none of them were human. Maybe I should back up a bit and explain. I guess you can say I had a pretty rough beginning. I know that's the standard excuse most serial killers use to try and justify their behavior, but it's the truth. It all started when I was 8. That was when I lost my vision. My childhood was a living hell. I grew up dirt poor on the wrong side of the tracks, as they say. My old man was a no-good drunken redneck who had trouble and holding down a steady job because of his alcoholism. He wasn't articulate enough to express his frustrations with his life situation in words, so instead he used his fists and hands on me and my mother to do it. For her part, my mother was a spineless asswipe who would rather stick with a man who routinely used her and her only child as a punching bag than leave him and try raising me on her own. I often showed up to school with bruises and an occasional black eye, but none of the teachers did shit about it because my family was poor white trash on welfare, so why should they give a fuck? To her credit, my school principal did try to get the police involved a time or two, but whenever they or social services showed up, my dad would always weasel his way out of it with some excuse or another, and my mom always backed him up. Then after they left, he would beat the shit out of me for trying to start up trouble, as if I had any say in the principal calling them. It all came to a head one summer day when I was 8. I was out in the garage, playing with my old man's tools like most little kids will, pretending I was a plumber or a repairman or whatever. My dad stumbled in, drunk, saw his tools scattered around, and decided the most reasonable course of action was to pick up a pipe wrench and then proceed to bash my head in with it. I blacked out. When I woke up from my coma 3 days later in the hospital, it was still black. At first I thought I was having trouble opening my eyes, or I had a bandage over them. When I put up my hands to feel them and I realized there was no bandage covering my eyes and they were wide open, I began to freak out. The doctors explained to me that the vision center of my brain had been severely damaged in the beating and that I would never see again. My dad went to prison for that. He was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, but only served 2.5 before someone who took exception to child beaters stuck a shiv in his throat in the cafeteria. In my opinion, the bastard got off way too easy. He was dead, and I was sentenced to a lifetime of being blind. I guess having to take care of a blind kid was too much of a hassle for my mom because she packed her bags and took off before I was even discharged from the hospital. I never, pardon the pun, saw her again. After that, I went to live with my maternal grandparents. They were a decent enough couple, but they weren't much better off than my folks had been. My grandma wanted to send me to a special school for blind kids where they teach them how to adjust to life in the world after losing their sight, teach them Braille and that kind of thing. But those places cost money, and that was something my grandparents didn't have much of to spare. Still, my childhood with them was a major improvement compared to the living hell I'd endured before. They raised me as best as they could and tried to educate me on their own. But they were country people and, well, not to sound ungrateful, not particularly bright. And it's not like I could attend a regular school in my condition. My grandpa died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver when I was 11, and then my grandma tried to raise me on her own until she died of a stroke when I was 15. After that, I was sent to live in a state-funded group home, which was just a fancy modern term for an orphanage. There, my life returned to a living hell for the next 3 years, as I endured abuse from the other kids, bullies taking advantage of my disability, while the overworked, underpaid staff, once again pardon the pun, turned a blind eye. The administration tried to set me up with a foster family on several occasions, but I guess most people don't find the idea of taking in a blind teenager very appealing. When I was 18 and legally an adult, the group home kicked me out. Leaving me to fend for myself. Isn't bureaucracy great? Which was no easy task for a blind guy with no real education or skills. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned to panhandling. I'd stand on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign a store owner had made for me out of pity, begging anyone who walked by, getting by on the charity of others. As I was to find out the hard way, in this day and age, a lot of people don't have much charity to spare, or compassion. I've been spit upon, insulted, called names, told to get a real job, and accused of faking my blindness for sympathy. A couple times I even got beaten up, I guess, just for kicks. It was pretty much just like it had been in the group home. For all I know, it even might have been the same kids. One hard lesson I've learned in my life is that some people never change. If you're born an asshole, you're going to die an asshole. There are some people who still have a spark of kindness in their hearts, though. And I usually made just enough during the day to buy a meal with. Mostly I slept outside using the narrow space behind a dumpster for shelter, bundling up in trash and old newspapers to stay warm. A few times someone was kind enough to guide me to a nearby homeless shelter so I wouldn't freeze to death in sub-zero weather. That was pretty much how my life went for the next 10 years. I got pretty bitter about it after a while, wondering if this was as good as it was going to get for me, if I would spend the rest of my life a blind beggar on a street corner, ignored by most of society, unable to even see the contemptuous expressions on the faces of those who walked by me, sleeping rough and having to forage through trash cans, eating the stuff others threw away on a particularly bad day when my earnings were pretty light. I started to wish I had never wakened from that coma that my dad had just killed me. I started to contemplate suicide, thinking about just stepping into the road anytime I heard the sound of an approaching engine. I might have done it too. Until I met him. The doctor. He came up to me one day after I had just been pretty aggressively told off by a businessman. You learn to identify people based upon their smells and the way they talk. This guy's smell was a combination of expensive aftershave and briefcase leather, and he spoke to me in the arrogant, cultured, self-righteous tone of someone too important to waste their time or money on unwashed street trash like myself, who basically told me I was a leech upon society who didn't contribute anything, and that I should drop dead. After the businessman walked away, I heard someone else approach and just stand there. I could sense them looking at me. "You get that a lot?" a new voice asked me. It sounded like an older man, probably in his 50s. I could detect a faint chemical smell to his clothes, almost medicinal in nature. "Most days, yeah," I replied with a shrug. He began asking me questions. How old was I? How had I lost my sight? How long had I been on the streets? I answered his questions, which were pretty standard questions I got asked all the time, by those who bothered to speak to me at all. "I might be able to help you," he told me. I figured he was just another do-gooder offering to buy me a hot meal and spare 20 minutes listening to me share my tale of woe, or some religious type wanting to give me an uplifting speech about how Jesus hadn't abandoned me and the Lord tests us all, and that when my trials were over, I would see again in the kingdom of heaven. I had been fed that type of bullshit before, mostly by super pious middle-class churchgoers in their expensive Sunday clothes, on their way to breakfast after having fulfilled their weekly duty and given lip service to God. And most of them never spared me a dime either. They probably didn't tip their server either. That's something else I learned about people during my time as a panhandler. Most of the people who care, or claim to, only care as long as they don't have to pay for it. Hypocrisy at its finest. Sorry if I sound bitter. My experience as being homeless made me pretty cynical. Yeah, I told him dryly. How so? You gonna give me a new pair of eyes? It's not your eyes that are the problem. Based on what you've told me, it's your brain that's the source of the problem. He then got down to brass tacks and asked me a question that gave me pause. How would you like to regain your sight? I was taken aback a little by what he had said. What the fuck are you talking about? I'm talking about potentially restoring your sight, he said. Who are you anyway? Oh, forgive me, I haven't properly introduced myself. My name is Carl Steiner, Dr. Carl Steiner. That so? I replied, feeling a flash of intrigue when he mentioned the word doctor. Yes, MD, PhD. To be more specific, I'm a neurosurgeon. You mean a brain surgeon? Well, to put it in layman's terms, yes. He paused for a moment. You look hungry. Why don't we go get something to eat, and then afterwards, we can discuss this in depth. Are you picking up the tab? I asked. But of course. He had me hooked. I was in no position to turn down the offer of a free meal, having not eaten since the previous afternoon. Plus, he had me genuinely interested when he mentioned possibly being able to restore my sight, although I didn't allow myself to get my hopes up too much. For all I knew, he was some quack or con man. I decided to humor him and, at the very least, hear what he had to say. Sure, why not? I said with a shrug. Excellent. He took me to a local chain restaurant. We sat across from each other in a booth, and he read the menu selections to me, giving my order to the server. He himself didn't order anything. The meal was easily the best I had had in weeks, which probably wasn't saying much since I had been sustained on a diet of fast food burgers and dumpster cast-offs for God only knew how long. I ate ravenously, gorging myself. He sat across from me, mostly in silence, and I could feel his eyes studying me. After I'd finished eating, he got down to business and laid it all out for me. He was a rather well-regarded neurosurgeon, now semi-retired, who had been an expert in the field of brain surgery for over 30 years. He had once worked for a major city hospital before stepping down, and now worked teaching as a professor at a nearby medical school. He had recently made a major breakthrough in neurosurgery and devised a radical new procedure to repair damage to the occipital lobe in the brain, the part of the brain that controlled vision, the part of my brain that had been turned into paste thanks to dear old Dad back when I was 8. He and his colleagues were looking for volunteer test subjects to try this new procedure out on, and I fit the bill. In addition to possibly being able to see again, I would be compensated for my contribution to medical science to the tune of $20,000. He warned me that the surgery was still highly experimental and not without risk. I could die or be rendered paralyzed or brain dead. When he was finished talking, he fell silent, awaiting my response. Frankly, I didn't feel like I had much to lose. My life was already shit. If it worked like he said it should, I would have my sight back and be 20 grand richer to boot. I would have a shot of finally being able to live a normal life. And if something went wrong and I wound up dead or a vegetable, well, then I wouldn't have to worry anymore about going hungry on a street corner without a roof over my head, at constant risk of starvation or dying from exposure or even being murdered for thrills by some psycho who knew the cops wouldn't give fuck one about some blind homeless guy getting offed. This had actually happened to a couple guys I was casually acquainted with through my infrequent visits to the homeless shelter. I felt it was a win-win situation either way, so I didn't give it much thought before giving him my answer. Let's go for it. He seemed pleased with my response. We shook on it, and he told me he would be in touch and he knew where to find me when the time came. 3 weeks later, a taxi cab pulled up to me while I was on the sidewalk on another unsuccessful venture to generate some income through the mostly non-existent sympathy of any pedestrians who passed by. The driver told me he had been sent by Dr. Steiner to take me to the medical campus to prep me for surgery. He guided me into the back of the taxi and off we went. 18 hours later, I was on an operating table surrounded by a team of physicians and technicians, led by Dr. Steiner himself. He stood by my side and asked me if I was ready. I told him I was. He gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze and told me I would be fine, although I thought I detected a faint note of uncertainty in his voice. I was hugely excited, knowing that when I woke up, I might be able to finally see the face of the man who was giving me this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and also terrified that I might not wake up at all. But there was no backing out now. The anesthesiologist placed the mask over my face, and I breathed deeply, fading into the blackness without even knowing it, because the blackness had already been there all along. And when I regained consciousness, my head, which was heavily bandaged, hurt like hell. My eyes were covered, but even through the layers of gauze, I could tell the surgery had been a success. I could detect light with my eyes, a barely perceptible sense of brightness. I sat up excitedly, and immediately, strong arms restrained me and forced me back down to the bed. I struggled. "Hey, let me go." Dr. Steiner spoke my name from in front of me and told me, "You must remain calm and relax. You need time to recover from the surgery." "No, take the bandages off. I want to see." "You'll have to wait at least another 3 days before the bandages can be removed, I'm afraid. To do so before could be detrimental to—" "But you don't understand," I shouted. "It worked. I can see the light through the bandages." "I do understand, and I'm glad to hear that. But you must remember you've been blind for the past 20 years. Your eyes will be extremely sensitive to light, and it could be very painful. You'll need to keep them covered until they've had time to adjust to what light they can already perceive." "Fuck you, man," I screamed. "If you don't calm down, I'm afraid I'll have to have your arms put in restraints and administer a sedative," he told me in a stern, authoritative voice. I sighed and finally relented. The arms holding me down, which I assumed belonged to a pair of orderlies, released me. Dr. Steiner spoke to me in a gentler tone. "I can understand your excitement, and I know you're eager to see again, but this is necessary. All good things take time." "If you say so," I muttered. I heard Dr. Steiner leave, but the 2 orderlies stayed with me in what I presumed was some kind of post-op recovery room to make sure I didn't try unwrapping my eyes myself. I lay there feeling miserable. I could finally see again after all these years, but I was still blind beneath the bandages wrapped around my head. I felt bitter at the irony of it. The next 3 days were going to be an eternity. If I had known what was to come, I would have kept my eyes bandaged. I would have preferred being blind. The next 3 days each seemed to last a lifetime. I became anxious, impatient, like a kid on Christmas Eve night, knowing that Santa is on his way with his big sack of toys. Or so I assumed a kid would feel. We never celebrated Christmas when I was a kid, being so poor we could barely pay our bills, let alone buy presents. Gradually, the pain in my head subsided to a dull ache. Each minute seemed to drag by for an hour because I had no way of telling time. Finally, the big day arrived. Dr. Steiner entered the room. "Are you ready?" He asked me, "Does the Pope wear a dress?" I said by way of answer, trying to be clever. Of course I was ready. I'd been ready to see again since that long ago day when I had waken up in a different hospital to discover the world had been swallowed by blackness. "Very well then. Please hold still while I remove the dressing." I did, feeling the pressure of his hand, holding my head steady and the snicking of scissors as they cut through the gauze, bound to the upper half of my head. My heart was pounding with anticipation. I couldn't breathe. The bandages were unwrapped layer by layer, the world becoming a little brighter with each barrier that was removed. Just before the last layer of gauze was removed, I closed my eyes. "All right, open your eyes." For a moment, I didn't even dare to do it. I had been awaiting this moment for days, so excited I could barely sleep. And now that it was here, I was scared shitless. "Open your eyes," Dr. Steiner repeated patiently. I did. The world flooded my vision, banishing the darkness I had existed in for most of my life. I gasped. I could see. For a moment, I was so shocked I couldn't even react. Everything was so clear, so vivid. It was as if I had just been born and was seeing the world for the first time through the eyes of an infant. The hospital room was overwhelming white and bright. Dr. Steiner stood before me, a distinguished-looking man in his mid-60s, older than I had originally thought, with rather shaggy salt and pepper hair and a full, well-manicured beard. He had a kind face and intelligent, thoughtful eyes. I looked at him as if I were seeing the face of God. "Well?" he asked me expectantly. "I can see," I told him in a hushed voice of total awe. He smiled, beaming with satisfaction and pride. "Congratulations." "I want to go outside. I want to see the world." "Very well, but you'll have to go in a wheelchair," he said, and summoned a nurse to bring one and help move me into it. I was still kind of weak from the surgery. He wheeled me out of the room and down a corridor. I took in everything we passed on the way, amazed at even the simplest detail in the polished tile floor, the lime green walls, the fluorescent light fixtures burning overhead. Everything seemed to gleam, seemed to have an almost three-dimensional sheen to it. He took me through a set of double doors and into the lobby of the main hospital. We approached the main entrance and I could see sunlight flooding in through the windows. Sunlight. The first sunlight I had seen after 20 long years of endless night. He pushed a button to open the handicap-accessible automatic door and wheeled me outside. I sat there looking around, my heart soaring with childish wonder and joy. A placid medical school campus lay before me, white modern buildings dotting a rich green landscape. The sky overhead was a bright pale blue spotted with clouds. Everything seemed much bigger than it actually was. Everything seemed huge. Everything was clearly defined. The straight lines and angles of the buildings, the leaves of the maple trees, the texture of the bark. Medical students and staff walked here and there. My brain absorbed the colors of the clothes they were wearing, colors I had almost forgotten even existed. For a moment, I felt as if my brain was going to freeze up with sensory overload. It was also overwhelming, also incredibly beautiful. I realized I was weeping. Dr. Steiner placed his hand on my shoulder. "Welcome back," he told me. "Thank you," I whispered. I was kept at the medical school hospital for another month to recover from my brain surgery. And so Dr. Steiner and his colleagues could run a battery of tests to see how well I adjusted to being able to see again. They prepped me for life on the outside, explaining to me how the world had changed in the time I had been blind. told me what I was to expect once I left the hospital. They explained to me how I would have to find a residence of my own and then find a job, teaching me the ins and outs of making my way in the world, how I would have to open a bank account, get a social security card, pay bills and rent, file taxes. They helped me catch up on my education some too, since I was still basically at the same second grade reading and writing level I had been at before I went blind, despite what my grandparents, who hadn't been too well educated themselves, had tried to teach me after I went to live with them. They told me there were classes I could take after I was discharged to help improve my literacy skills, and gave me several numbers and websites I could visit. For me, probably, the most incredible experience was finally seeing my own face in a mirror for the first time. I was stunned. The scrawny little 8-year-old I dimly remembered was long gone. The face of a 28-year-old man looked back at me, my sandy brown hair, which had been shaved in back for my surgery, rather long and unkempt. A beard covered my lower face. I was deeply tanned from being outside for so long, and gaunt from malnutrition. I sat there for several minutes in mute shock, peering into my own pale blue eyes reflected back at me in the mirror Dr. Steiner held for me. I looked at Dr. Steiner. "Can I get a shave and a haircut?" "I think that can be arranged," he replied. Afterwards, I took my first real shower, not including the one I had been given before surgery, in ages, reveling blissfully in the feeling of the warm spray of water. I felt like I was in heaven. Occasionally, I had pounding headaches, and bolts of sharp pain would pierce my eyes. Dr. Steiner explained that this was perfectly normal and that it was my eyes still adjusting to being able to see again. He gave me painkillers for these episodes when they became too unbearable. I felt it was a small price to pay for the gift I had been given, the gift so many of us take for granted. I watched a lot of TV and movies on the TV in my room and was given a laptop so I could search the internet, which had just been starting to take off when I went blind, catching up with all the current pop culture trends and celebrities who had risen and subsequently fallen in some cases since I had been 8. I also caught up on all the current technological advances I had missed out on, such as YouTube, smartphones, and Facebook. Everything seemed to be happening too fast, seemed unreal. I wondered if all of this might just be a dream, and any second I would wake up cold and hungry, lost once again in the blackness of my own private hell. It all seemed too good to be true. I would soon find out it was. One afternoon, not long before I was discharged, I was out on the campus, just sitting on a bench, enjoying the spring sunshine, still enthralled with my newly returned vision. A pretty blonde female med student in her early 20s was jogging down a path in front of me. Something else I'd recently discovered was women. I had long since hit puberty, but being blind, I hadn't truly been able to appreciate the female form and all its wonders until just lately. I was incredibly horny all the time, especially after being exposed, in more ways than one, to the likes of Salma Hayek, Halle Berry, and Angelina Jolie in some of the movies I had seen on TV. Sex education was something else I needed to be caught up on. I took a moment to enjoy the sight of her lithe, athletic young figure, clad in spandex shorts and a tank top in motion before me. I started to get an erection and quickly covered it with my hand, trying to do so casually. She spotted me and shot me a quick, friendly smile. For a split second, her face seemed to change. A ripple of distortion seemed to pass over her attractive features, the way the flat surface of a pond will ripple if you drop a pebble into it. I thought I glimpsed something else, something beneath her face. I couldn't tell what it was. She was moving, so it was a blur, but it looked like a patch of blackness with 2 bright spots of red in it. Just as quickly as it had happened, her face returned to normal, and she had passed me, her back to me, as she continued jogging down the path. I was shocked, puzzled, and pretty damn frightened by what had just happened. I told Dr. Steiner about it when I went back inside, but he just reassured me that it was quite common for people who were recovering from brain surgery to experience visual and auditory hallucinations early on, especially when the part of the brain in question was the part that controlled sight. It could also be a side effect of the pain medication I had been taking. He told me it was nothing to worry about and that it should pass in time. I trusted his judgment, him being the professional, and let it go. And for a while, I believed he was right. I didn't experience anything else like that during the rest of my stay at the campus hospital. The horror started 6 months later. I left the hospital a few days later with some new clothes and a few essentials Dr. Steiner had bought to help me get started with my new life. He shook my hand and wished me the best of luck, and I thanked him again for everything he had done for me. It was a hell of a lot more than most people had ever done for me my whole life. I had some basic toiletries, toothbrush, razor, shampoo, etc., along with my new clothes in an inexpensive duffel bag. I also had a check written in the amount of $20,000, which I soon deposited in the checking account I opened at a local bank that same day, in my pocket. Next, I went about looking for a place to call home. A real home, all of my very own. I found a relatively cheap apartment in the city and made my first rent payment, plus a security deposit. It wasn't much, just one medium-sized room with a bed, table, kitchenette, and a small bathroom. But after my years of being homeless, it was like a penthouse apartment, a place where I could be warm and feel safe and wouldn't have to worry about freezing to death in the middle of January. The next 5 months were without a doubt the happiest of my life. Maybe even the only truly happy time in my whole miserable life. I quickly found a job bagging groceries at a supermarket. It was the best I could do with my limited education and lack of skills, but it was better than nothing. And even made something I had never had before. A few friends. They also worked at the supermarket. Sometimes we'd get together after work at a bar to toss back a few and shoot the shit. I even started to flirt with a cute cashier named Nikki, who was almost a decade younger than me. Given time, we might have even become a couple. But things didn't work out that way. I was taking online classes at night to build upon my education, hoping I could eventually go for my GED. I even took a road test and got my driver's license, something I had never expected to be able to do, and used some of the money I had been given to purchase a halfway decent used car. I was still marveling at the miraculous return of my long-lost sight. And anytime I was downtown, I was amazed at how huge the city was, how tall the buildings were, how many people and vehicles there were, how fast things moved in the sighted world where you didn't have to grope around, feeling your way through the darkness, scared of what obstacles might be waiting in front of you, careful not to trip over anything in your path. People walked briskly and confident, secure in their visual ability, unaware of how easily it could be snatched away from them. Most of all, I was amazed at how colorful and bright the world was. Sometimes I would just stand in amazement, watching the sun glint off the glass of the towering skyscrapers, while people passing by gave me strange looks. Sometimes I'd sit in the park and watch the sunset, which had never seemed as glorious to me as a kid as it did then after I'd learned to truly appreciate being able to see it. For a while, I thought I actually had a real chance of leading a normal life, of being able to fit in and be accepted by society at last, for the first time in my life. Then, about 5 months after my surgery, the headaches returned. Minor at first, they gradually increased over the next few weeks into excruciating pounding migraines that left me nearly paralyzed in bed, unable to do anything. They were much worse than the ones I had experienced while recovering from my surgery in the hospital. My eyes hurt too, throbbing in their sockets, my vision occasionally becoming blurry and even doubled, like everything I saw was a double exposure of a photograph. Sometimes I saw flashes of bright light that seemed to fill my entire head, blotting out everything else. I missed several days of work and was threatened with the loss of my job, pathetic as it was. I was terrified, wondering if I was experiencing some kind of setback, if maybe my brain was starting to reject the surgery or something, and I was about to go blind again. I even wondered if I might be developing a brain tumor. I went to a doctor about my problem, who referred me to an ophthalmologist who could find nothing wrong with my eyes. I even went back to Dr. Steiner and told him what was going on. He had me returned to the hospital where they ran a CAT scan of my brain. But once again, there was nothing apparently wrong with me. He told me it was probably just a belated effect of the procedure I'd undergone, and told me that some patients experience infrequent headaches for years after brain surgery. He prescribed some painkillers for me, which took the edge off the agony, but never fully erased it. I was just barely able to function again and returned to my job at the supermarket. Then about a month after the headaches had begun, they abruptly ceased. I was relieved, thinking things had gone back to normal. They hadn't. I would soon find out things had changed for the worst. One early evening in mid-October, I was driving home from my shift and was stopped by a red light at a crosswalk. I sat there idling, not thinking about anything in particular, while a stocky, middle-aged businessman in a designer suit, clutching an expensive briefcase in one hand and arguing loudly to someone on the smartphone he was holding in the other, crossed in front of me. I watched him without much interest, wondering half seriously if he might be the same self-important asshole who had told me to drop dead last spring, just before Dr. Steiner had come into my life. Still ranting on his phone, he threw me a passing glance, and his face changed. I froze in my seat, my hands involuntarily clutching the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was the same thing that I'd seen happen to the girl jogging, only this time his face didn't return to normal after a second as hers had. It was as if once my brain had registered the change, it became permanent, like my brain wouldn't allow my eyes to unsee it. I saw what lay hidden beneath his normal face. It was like a patch of thick black shadow covering where his face should have been. Thick, featureless shadow in which 2 bright points of red light glowed, like embers in the ashes of a fire. 2 red, burning, inhuman eyes. Then he was on the other side of the street and gone. I sat there even after the light had turned green, my heart racing, my mind reeling. What the fuck had just happened? I forced myself to stay calm while I drove home. Then, as soon as I entered my apartment, I collapsed on my bed, having a panic attack. What I had just seen couldn't have been real. It had to be another hallucination, like the girl I had seen jogging at the campus. I remembered what Dr. Steiner had told me about brain surgery, patients experiencing hallucinations while they recovered. But as far as I knew, I had recovered and hadn't experienced anything else like that until tonight. I thought at first that maybe it was the pain medication I had been taking screwing with my head, causing me to see things. But I had stopped taking the pain meds when my headaches had ceased. I wondered if I was losing my mind, if maybe I should see a psychiatrist. I drank a couple beers and slowly calmed myself down, trying to rationalize what I had seen. I had been dealing with a lot of stress at work lately, picking up a ton of extra shifts since 2 other baggers had been out with the flu, and I told myself my tired, overworked mind had just imagined seeing the businessman's face change into whatever that thing had been. I convinced myself that's all it had been, my eyes playing tricks on me. A week went by without incident. Then one late afternoon, not long before Halloween, I was bagging groceries as usual, thinking about going with a couple of the guys to see a movie after work and not really paying attention. When the customer I was bagging for, an older upper crust, high society woman in a fashionable Donna Karan dress and a fur coat, began berating me for almost crushing her eggs beneath a bag of organic canned vegetables. I nodded apologetically, not really fazed, as she continued to upbraid me harshly. A steady stream of insults and name-calling. Baggers were at the low end of the totem pole in the supermarket hierarchy and bore the brunt of the wrath when it came to rude customers. So I was used to it. Plus, I already had a thick skin from all the years of verbal and sometimes physical abuse I had endured from people while being homeless. I glanced up to offer her a brief, subservient smile and felt it freeze on my face. Where a moment before there had been the face which bore the unnaturally tight, stretched look of someone who had had too many facelifts in a desperate bid to hold on to their fading good looks. Of an elegant, upper-class woman wearing an expression of imperious, classist disdain, there was now only a smudge of inky blackness, solid except for 2 red, inhuman eyes that burned like coals. For a second I froze, feeling horror race through my heart. It was the first time I saw one up close. Only 4 feet separated us. I stared into that dark void where a face should have been, not hearing the woman or the thing that looked like a woman as it continued its harangue over the incompetence of the employees of this establishment. Those red eyes seemed to bore into my soul. I glanced quickly to the cashier, a surly, bitchy blonde teenager named Kim, but she was casually scanning the woman's coupons with a bored expression, unaware of the inhuman entity that stood on the other side of the register. The thing finally fell silent from its rant and seemed to regard me for a moment in silence, cocking its head slightly, as if realizing that I could see through its disguise, could see its real face. Quickly, I snapped out of it, regaining my composure, and continued bagging its groceries, trying to appear as nonchalant as humanly possible. I glanced out of the corner of my eye to Kim as she finished checking out the woman's purchases and handed her the receipt. For a second, they made eye contact, but Kim didn't react to the horror directly in front of her. I realized that she couldn't see its true form. All she saw was a normal, if rather cuntish woman of higher social standing, who looked down on the lower classes with contempt. "Have a nice day," I told the thing with forced cheeriness as it wheeled its shopping cart out of the store, ignoring me. The moment it was out of the store, I felt myself collapsing inwardly. I felt like my head was spinning. I was quivering a little, and abruptly, I realized I was going to be sick. I told Kim I had to use the restroom and I would be right back. She just rolled her eyes, uninterested. I made a beeline for the nearest men's room, burst in to find it, fortunately, empty, and ducked into a stall, vomiting into the toilet. When I was finished, I just knelt there for a while, gasping for air, trying to pull myself back together. Something was going on here, something I didn't understand, something frightening. When I had myself more or less under control, I cleaned up at the sink, splashing water on my face, then patting it dry with paper towels. Then existed the men's room. "Are you all right?" An older cashier named Casey, who I was kind of friendly with, asked me as I returned to the front end of the supermarket. "You look kind of pale." I smiled at her calmly and told her I did feel a little sick. I must have caught what Zach and Randall had last week. She looked concerned and told me I should go home and get some rest. I told her I would do just that. Luckily for me, my shift was almost over and I had the next 2 days off. I finished my shift, and as soon as I had clocked out, I left the store and headed across the mostly deserted parking lot towards my car. It was early evening and already mostly dark, except for what light was cast by the parking lot light poles. I kept glancing around, leery, paranoid, half convinced that thing was going to pop out from some hiding place and attack me before I reached the car. I walked slowly, my ears tuned for the slightest sound. I felt my heart sink when I heard footsteps approaching steadily in my direction. I hurried to my car, frantically fumbling my keys out of my pocket, and dropped them. I reached for them, and a voice spoke my name directly behind me. I jumped and spun around, exhaling with relief, when I saw it was just 2 other baggers I'd gotten close with, Carrie and Neil, both of whom were around my age. They asked me if I was ready to go to the movie we had been planning on seeing, but I told them I wasn't feeling very well and told them to go on without me, that we'd do another movie some other time. They both seemed to understand, said goodbye, and walked off. I got in my car and made sure to lock my doors before taking off. My thoughts were racing as I drove home, and I wasn't paying full attention. Almost rear-ending a Honda Civic, stopped in front of me at a red light, causing the driver to stick his hand out the window and flip me off. I parked outside my apartment complex and made my way to the building, still glancing around nervously. I didn't feel safe until I was in my apartment with the door shut and locked behind me. I sat at the table in front of the secondhand TV I had bought. There was a horror movie on one of the channels. An Egyptian mummy was stalking the residents of an upscale Manhattan high-rise. I stared blankly at the screen, not seeing the movie. I was lost in deep thought, trying to make sense of it all. There were beings out there that looked and acted and sounded human, things that apparently only I could see in their true form. I had encountered 2 so far, or maybe 3, including the jogging girl at the medical school campus. I didn't know what they were, where they had come from, or most importantly, what they were doing here. Part of me still wanted to rationalize what was going on. Maybe they were hallucinations, or maybe I really was going crazy. But the rest of me didn't buy it. If everyone I encountered looked like one of those things, maybe I could have believed I was nuts. But so far it had only happened to a select few. I thought about calling someone, the police, my doctors, but what could they do? No one else could see what those things really looked like. The doctors would think I was seeing things, and the cops would think I was a lunatic or some asshole pulling a half-assed prank. They'd probably figure I was drunk or on drugs. I realized, with cold dismay, I was on my own. I didn't know what was going on, but I was determined to find out. I decided that the next time I saw one of those creatures, I was going to follow it and get to the bottom of this. This proved to be a terrible mistake. I was off it the next 2 days. I didn't let them go to waste by staying in my apartment or hanging out with my new friends. Instead, I began to search. I wandered the city, up and down the sidewalks, through parks and parking lots, pretending to browse in shops and department stores. I took the subway from one end of town to the other, then back again. I was watching people. Everyone I saw, I studied them carefully, trying to be discreet. I watched the crowds of pedestrians on the sidewalks, the commuters who rode the subway, the young trophy wives and career women who went shopping at the more upscale department stores, the bohemian artists and lovers seated at the outdoor cafes, the people enjoying their day in the park. Indian summer had arrived, and it was unseasonably warm. The people dining in the fast food restaurants where I went to eat my meals. I watched everyone I saw, carefully studying their faces for the slightest flicker, the slightest discrepancy. I tried to appear casual, indifferent. I imagine that to most people I had the look of your usual fish-out-of-water small-town tourist, newly arrived in town and just seeing the city for the first time. I spent that entire first day doing that, and when it got dark, I returned to my apartment having learned nothing. I wondered again if I might just be imagining all of this. I fell into a troubled sleep. The next day I repeated the process. It was a gorgeous bright fall day. The trees in the park lush with the dazzling colors of autumn foliage, red, orange, yellow. But I took no notice. The novelty of being able to see again had worn off, and I was on a mission. I began to lose hope as the day drifted towards early evening and the sun began to set. I hadn't encountered anything out of the ordinary, not one person whose face had given even the subtlest indication that they weren't what they appeared to be. I was just about to give up and return home when it happened. A man was walking down the sidewalk on the other side of the street, going in the opposite direction. He was a young guy, probably mid-20s, and had the rakish good looks and fashion of your typical rich playboy, leading a carefree lifestyle of casual debauchery. A casual Armani suit, shirt unbuttoned at the throat to display a gold chain, matching Rolex on one wrist. The kind of pampered, entitled scumbag who lived in a penthouse and survived off daddy's trust fund and always had cocaine residue around his nostrils, and spent his nights in clubs, picking up women he would never see again after the next morning. I gave him a cursory glance, and his face rippled. My heart skipped a beat. His face wavered, distorting before transforming into that black, formless void I knew so well. His soulless red eyes glowed in the near darkness. He continued on his way down the sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, feeling a brief flicker of indecision. Then I crossed the street and began to follow after him. He walked unhurriedly but purposefully, seemingly with some destination in mind. I tracked him from a cautious distance behind, careful to avoid detection. I followed him for over an hour as the sun finished setting and nightfall descended. The street lights came on automatically. The crowds of pedestrians gradually dried up and the streets became less populated. I followed him, or rather it, to the very outskirts of the city, into the industrial district, warehouses and factories surrounding us, smokestacks towering to the night sky, colossal black shapes against a backdrop of navy blue sky dotted with stars. The streets became increasingly deserted until it was just the two of us and an occasional wino huddled around a fire drum, none of whom paid us any mind. The area became more rundown and dilapidated the further we walked. The street littered with trash, burned-out cars on the curbs, brick walls covered with spray-painted gang graffiti. Some of the buildings were long abandoned, their windows boarded up except for those that had been broken into by squatters and junkies looking for a place to shoot up. A lot of the streetlights had been smashed out, and it was much darker here. I became scared, not just because of the strange entity I was pursuing. This was a bad part of town to be in during the day, and here I was smack dab in the middle of it at night. I scanned my surroundings cautiously, eyeing any potential hiding places in the thick shadows where I half expected to be ambushed any second by a mugger or a drug addict or a gang. At last, my quarry stopped, about 50 yards ahead of me, and turned down an alleyway between a meat packing plant and a half-burned-down warehouse, disappearing from view. I stopped there, debating with myself if I should continue after him. It could be a trap. Maybe he had caught on that someone was following him. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home, to just forget about the whole thing. Part of me didn't want to know the answer to this mystery, to just leave it alone and resume living my average everyday life. But I had already come too far. I had to know. I went to the mouth of the alley, walking as quietly as possible, and peered in. At first, I was confused by what I was seeing. 30 feet away, the young man/thing was standing with its back to me, holding a young girl in a tight lover's embrace. They at first appeared to be kissing, but then I noticed that their mouths were not actually touching. The thing had its mouth, or rather the empty black space where its mouth should have been, about 3 inches away from the girl's parted lips. He/it appeared to be hyperventilating, sharp, rapid intakes of breath. But he didn't seem to be exhaling, only inhaling. I can't explain it any better than that. It looked like he was performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in reverse, and instead of blowing air into the girl's lungs, he was sucking air out. Then I saw the expression on the girl's face, a frozen look of pure, helpless terror. She seemed to be paralyzed in the arms of the thing that held her. As I watched, she went slack, going limp in its arms, as if she had passed out. It let her go, and she dropped to the pavement like a sack of potatoes. I was so dumbstruck with confusion and shock, I just stood there transfixed, instead of ducking out of sight. The thing in the casual Armani suit turned to leave, and stopped in its tracks, its burning red gaze locked upon me. For a long, seemingly endless moment, neither of us reacted. We just stared at each other. Fleetingly, I felt an absurd, insane sense of awkward embarrassment. The way you might feel when you walk in on someone doing something private that you shouldn't be seeing. Then the thing spoke to me, and its voice was completely ordinary and human. The slightly anxious voice of a man in his 20s with a trace of panic that I knew was totally bogus. "Hey man, you better call 911 quick. I think this chick's having a heart attack or something." I was bewildered by this for a second. Then it dawned on me that the creature wasn't yet aware that I could see past its facade and knew it wasn't human. I stared at it, wide-eyed, and asked it in a low, nearly strengthless voice, "What are you?" Its body noticeably tensed, and I think it understood at that moment that I could see through its deception. "What the fuck are you?" I asked it again. It didn't answer me. Instead, it let out an unearthly, high-pitched howl and suddenly charged at me, moving with shocking speed, hurling towards me like a bullet. Part of my brain told me to turn and flee, but I didn't listen. I acted purely on instinct, not pausing to analyze my actions. I grabbed a 4-foot length of rusty iron pipe from a heap of junk beside me, and as the thing closed in, I swung at its head. The pipe connected solidly with its head with a thwack sound, and the shadow-faced thing tumbled to the ground at my feet. In a burst of frantic, terrified adrenaline, I swung the pipe into its head over and over in a wild frenzy. I felt blood spatter my face. When I finally stopped, sometime later, I let the pipe fall from my hands and clang to the ground. It lay there motionless, covered in blood, and I knew it was dead. I stood there, gasping over its body, then stepped over it and approached the girl to see if I could help her. She lay there already pale, her eyes staring dully up at the night sky, not breathing. I could tell without having to check that she was dead. She looked very young, maybe 16 at the most, and was pretty, with bleached blonde hair, but at the same time had a certain harshness, a worn quality to her face, as if she had been prematurely aging from a tough life on the streets. She was wearing high heels, a short leather miniskirt, and a fishnet top with no bra underneath. And I had a good idea what her profession had been. I went back to the mouth of the alley, stepping over the corpse of the thing that had killed her to leave. And as I glanced down at it, I felt a fresh sense of horror rising within me. The thing's face had reverted back to that of the young man I had originally seen. A perfectly normal human face, albeit covered in blood. Glazed eyes opened in shock, mouth agape, as if he had been trying to scream or call for help when he died. His skull had been split open from the force of the bludgeoning I had given him, and blood and a pink, pulpy substance I knew had to be brain matter was slowly leaking out of his head and forming a puddle on the pavement. Gagging, trying not to throw up, I fled the alley and ran off into the night. If you're still here, you just made it through one of the scariest stories you will ever hear in the internet. Most people clicked away. You didn't. That means something. I want to know, and do you think this actually happened, or is it just a story? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video gave you chills or kept you up at night, hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it tells me you want more stories like this. Subscribe to Mikey Blocks and turn on the bell, because the next story I found is even darker than this one. You don't want to miss it. Until next time, stay safe out there.